Good afternoon and welcome to our webinar. The title of this webinar is How to Use Questions that Promote Inquiry in Social Studies. We're excited to have you here with us today, and hopefully as the webinar progresses we'll have some more people joining us throughout the session. We hope it will be engaging and interactive and informative for you as you use inquiry in your social studies classrooms. Just to review some webinar controls for you, we are recording this webinar so that it'll be archived and as a PD resource for you. And you are muted right now, but you can type questions in the question box or on the Padlet that we're going to show you in just a second. Or you can certainly wait to the end of the webinar if you would like, and we'll unmute you, and then you can ask questions as we come to the end. So certainly feel free to ask questions as we go and type them in or hold them to the end, whichever works for you. We just want to remind you that this is the third webinar in a 4-part series. We are building off of some foundational knowledge for this webinar from some of our past webinars this year. So if this is your first time joining us, you may find it helpful to go to our past webinars on the C3 framework and inquiry, and all of those are hyperlinked right there for you, and you can just easily find them on our wiki site, but they're also right there. You can also find any past webinars from 2012 to 2013 in the hyperlink there as well if you would like to go. They're always archived, the PowerPoints available, and the notes and stuff from those past webinars. We did say today that we want to be interactive, and we're going to be using the real-time tool known as Padlet, and if you've ever used that before, you know that it's very easy and simple to use. And if you haven't, we'll take you there right now and show you how simple and easy it is. So if you haven't already, if you'll just click on this link up here where it says padlet.com/wall/effective questions, and that's going to be our interactive framework for much of the webinar. And if you would like to type on the Padlet, if you've never used it, you'll see this little pen down here right to the left of the screen. You can just click on that, and then a box will come up for you to add post, and it'll continue to add your post as we go through. So again, we hope that you'll the posts are anonymous, so we hope that you'll be free to post as we go through it and feel very comfortable. If you have questions, again, about that, just feel free to type them in the question box. This webinar is presented to you by our entire team, our Section Chief, Faye Gore, Ann Carlock, myself, Justin Knox, Dr. Steve Majada, and Michelle McLaughlin, and of course, our program assistant, Bernadette Cole. So we are all in this together and presenting and forming this webinar together. So the focus question of this webinar is, how can I use questions effectively to support inquiry in social studies? And some people may call these essential questions, some people call them guiding questions, others may say driving or even compelling questions. But whatever it is that you call them, we're talking about effective questioning for the purposes of this webinar. So as we go throughout the webinar, we want you to think about why we as teachers would want to spend time to first engage in inquiry, especially in social studies, and then also why would we want to take time to really craft an effective question that really drives inquiry. We want you to also reflect on, as we go through the process, of the importance, again, of using inquiry. We're going to come back to this question at the end of the webinar, and at the end of the webinar, like I said before, you can certainly feel free to share out what elements you use of this, what your challenges may be, your reflections, or any questions that you may have. And I just want to reiterate, while we're focusing on teacher-created questions, it's very important to note that some of the very best questions will arise from your students. And so that is certainly something that we want students to be creating their own questions and as we use inquiry. But for the purposes of this webinar, we're going to be talking about teacher-created questions and crafting effective questions from the teacher standpoint to drive and promote and support inquiry. We know we all come from different backgrounds and we're serving in different roles, so we need to think, and you'll see this graphic on the screen, about what we already know and what we need to know about this topic. We want you to think about what it is you already know in terms of crafting effective questions and what you need to know. And for the sake of time for the webinar, I've already started creating a list of things that we need to know. And sorry, this thing keeps popping up on my screen. But you can feel free to type in more as we go along if there are other needs and knows. So I've already created that question on the Padlet for you. If you have other need to knows other than what I've put up here already about what is an effective question, what's the purpose, and how do I write effective questions, then certainly feel free to go ahead and type your need to knows in there. Each time you craft a question, it's important that we allow students time to reflect on this very process of what we've just done. And I know we're pressed for time in a webinar, but you would definitely want to give students plenty of time to make the list of what they already know and what they need to know. This is a great formative assessment tool and one that's really going to drive inquiry in your classroom. All of the questions that students put up here for need to know, or anything that you guys put up there for your need to know, should be answered at the end of the inquiry process. So students shouldn't leave there still needing to know the answers to those questions if we've created effective questions, and also if we've effectively taken them through the inquiry process. Now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Steve, and he's going to talk about the objectives for this session and the foundation for this webinar.
Hello everybody, can you hear me? I want to pretend everybody can hear me. All right, fantastic. All right. So happy to have you here today. Very excited to have you here today. Looking forward to talking with you about inquiry and questions. So let's talk some about our objectives today. First, we're going to talk a little bit about the inquiry after the C3 framework. In order to develop questions that support inquiry. The C3 framework, hopefully some of you guys attended our last couple of sessions. We really focus quite a bit on the C3 framework, and we're really trying to use the C3 framework to guide some of the work that we do moving forward. It is a wonderful model to promote inquiry. If I could get a show of hands, just real quick, on the little hand button, how many folks here are familiar with the C3 framework? Just raise your name, please. I see Joyce Harris. Peggy, wonderful. And that is it. Okay, well, it's Jason. Okay, fantastic. If you're not familiar with it, that's okay. We're going to talk a little bit about it here, and we have some links for you at the end of the presentation on the C3 framework, which you'll find useful moving forward. Our next objective is to understand the process of creating and refining questions that support inquiry. We're going to talk some about ways to create questions, types of questions that you can work on, and ways that these questions can be used to support your students' explorations of topics. And again, tying into that, developing questions that really support inquiry in social studies. So those are our big and most important objectives. Now, as a reminder, this presentation and this PowerPoint will be available on our wiki on the webinar page, which I sent that out in the discussion box, and we'll show you where to find it at the end of the presentation. Right. So, talking about connecting inquiry to the K-12 social studies-based framework. Ultimately, effective questioning is the key to inquiry. The C3 framework in Dimension 1 talks about the fact that a rich social studies experience, and I'm quoting here, is the capability for developing questions that can frame and advance inquiry. And the questions come in two forms, compelling and supporting questions. And ultimately, these sorts of questions are really the key to effective inquiry learning. Students must be able to ask relevant questions. Not only students, but also ask teachers too. Teachers must be able to ask relevant questions and help students develop ways to search for answers and generate those explanations. And emphasis is placed on the process of thinking, as this applies to student interaction with concepts and big ideas. And again, our big focus in this state and as a section has been on concept-based curriculum and instruction, and the inquiry model. And inquiry as a whole contributes so much to the conceptual model. And again, that ties back to that C3 framework and Dimension 1 and onward, where a lot of the work really is conceptual at that level. So let's talk briefly about the C3 framework. For some folks, this might be a brand new thing. For other folks, you're already familiar with it, and we do have a whole webinar on it, so which you see linked at the bottom there. I'll show you where to find it real quick. We can come back to it. Hopefully the internet will not die on me. If it dies on me, you will be able to hear me anyway, so... oh, never mind, I said that. It's been a long day. So what we're looking at right now, this is our webinar page, and this is where you will find the webinar we have on the C3 framework. Dr. Kathy Swan out of the University of Kentucky, go SEC, Dr. John Lee at NC State, and of course Dr. Bruce Van Sletterite out of NC Charlotte. Were some of the folks that attended the webinar and took part in the webinar with, of course, our very own Faye Gore as one of the editors of the whole system. So let's talk about the inquiry out in the C3 framework. Ultimately, as we see here, it's an interlocking and mutually reinforcing ideas between four dimensions of informed inquiry in social studies. The first is developing questions and planning inquiries. And for our purposes, this is probably, at least for today, the most important section. This is actually Dimension 1 in the C3 framework. And it really focuses on helping students and teachers create compelling and supporting questions for instruction and for exploration. But moving on, with the other three dimensions, you have applying disciplinary tools and concepts, which actually Michelle is going to talk a little bit about later on in the next webinar. Evaluating sources and using evidence, and communicating conclusions and taking informed action. We're going to talk a little bit about taking informed action today as well, and connect that back to types of questions that we tend to focus on and work on. But we definitely encourage you to check out the webinar that we have done in the past, because we think it is a very nice overview to what we're trying to do in the state over the next couple of years. Now, just to clarify, the C3 framework is not replacing any standards. It connects to our standards very easily, but we are not getting new standards. We are not rewriting the standards based on the C3 framework. Right? The C3 framework just informs some of the curriculum work that we're doing moving forward. Does anybody have any questions about anything that we've talked about so far? You can either post those questions in the Padlet, or you can post them in the question box or the chat box of the webinar. And, take a breather here and let folks ask any questions that they have.